Welcome to Mental Stillness. My name is Derek, and I'm excited that somehow you stumbled across this podcast. One of my goals when starting this podcast was to bring mental health conversations into leadership circles. Today's guest is Willy Kuhne, a leader at Google that has been scaling global teams across North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. At Google, he oversees a $500 million program portfolio and is the creator of the standard of consistency, which is a leadership framework driving high performance through clarity, rhythm, and trust. He is deeply passionate, and one of the reasons I wanted to have him on this episode, he's passionate about personal development, helping global teams in different contexts operationalize excellence at scale. Beyond tech, he's the co-founder of Nortehaus, a boutique retreat where architecture and brand meet. And when he's not shaping systems or culture, he's trying to raise a very kind human, navigating the real-world lessons of unpredictability, priorities, and leading with heart.
Well, hello, Derek. Thanks for having me. You asked me about my life, where everything started. For me, it started in East Germany, actually. So I think we often talk about Germany as a whole construct, and if I think about this, I think most people think of it as an economic powerhouse. But I grew up on the east side, coming fresh out of the Soviet takeover, the GDR. So that was an interesting upbringing because you saw a country that was slowly westernizing, where there was cafes before, and McDonald's would pop in, and so on. So I saw a lot of change in my youth, which I didn't think of anything at that time. It was just what life was. Went to school normally, went to gymnasium, and the ninth grade was at the verge almost of failing classes. I had, I think, a D in chemistry, a D in Latin, and I was almost at a D in English. So that was my status, and it was a essential leap of faith that I followed a friend of mine, and my friend essentially said, "Hey, Willy, do you want to go for an exchange year to the US?" I was like, "All right, let's go for it. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what's going on," and threw myself into that adventure. And basically, a couple months later, it was late summer. It was August. I arrived with a Delta airplane in Salt Lake City, and so there I was, all of a sudden, not speaking a word English, first time away from my parents, and I had to figure it all out in Salt Lake. And it was a very grounding experience because you, as a 16-year-old that is rebellious and wants to dive into the world and challenge things and listen to rock music, all of a sudden you're on your own. Nobody's buying your school books. Nobody's buying the stuff that you need for the classes. You have to figure this out. And that at a very limited language capacity. So lots of stuff happened there. And then essentially I made it work. I made it work so much that I really loved it. So much. I found so much love for the school system. And I think the US sometimes gets scrutinized for the school system, at least outside of the US. But I loved it because why? It was extremely practical for me. So I was able to mix and mingle calculus, then I had world history, then I had weightlifting, and then I had TV and video production for the school TV station. And to me, that really worked the brain. And my grades immediately improved. I became, instead of a D student, I became an A student. And I was like, I would never want to go back to that school system that I found in Germany. And so I made it work with my host family at that time. And also in the American spirit, I was living with a host family for 5 years. So somebody that was initially strange to me said, "I love this guy so much. I'm going to take him in my family and he can stay with us for 5 years." Would have been unimaginable to me. So I transferred all my grades, finished high school, went to college because college tuition is out of state for me because I'm an international student. I powered through 3. I guess I did the trimester thing. So instead of the semester thing, and finished college in 3 years in Utah as well. And then I went back to Germany, finally ran out of funds to finish my master's, and then started into my career at Google, ultimately.
Yeah, so let's talk about the pathway into Google. So is that something you pursued or you kind of fell into by chance?
It's a little bit of both, to be honest, and I'll tell you why. As I grew up in Germany, as I started to do school in Germany, to my master's in Germany, I thought you need a Yale degree, a Harvard degree, a prestigious university degree to make it into Google. And so when somebody in a Facebook job board for my university at that time posted an offering that they're looking for account strategists at Google, I was like, okay, what's the worst that can happen if I apply? The worst that can happen is they say no, and then all good is to be expected on my end anyways. To my surprise, I was invited for an interview. And what I learned later in the interview is that they didn't care so much about the school at that time. So I was wrong about my belief, but what they really liked on my resume was my sales experience that I had in the US. So when I lived in the US as well as part of college, I worked a job where I sold office supplies, a little bit like The Office, with Michael Scott. I would sell paper and ink cartridges, but I wouldn't
I'm
do
glad
this
you
on the
referenced the
phone.
American version of The Office. Thank you.
It's my favorite. Also, it's my wife's favorite. So if I don't do it,
Yep. Well
she
done.
won't listen to the podcast. And so um, I had to go door to door at businesses, and I had to use my charisma very early on to get past the gatekeeper and then sell the product to the business owner and do that at 100% commission. And that was a skill at that time that Google was looking for. And that is a vital skill that has brought me all the way up in my career to where I am now. So that's why I said it's a little bit of both, a little bit by accident, but also a little bit by pursuing it.
Get into kind of what your role has been now within Google and kind of more of the leadership side of things, like maybe some leadership lessons that Google had taught you or the things that you've, I guess, had to learn to truly thrive in a role at such a company as Google.
My role today is I'm a vendor operations lead for our businesses that we run out of Portugal. So we essentially service our sales markets in Europe from here. And this is for our SMBs that we have in EMEA. And so that obviously takes a lot of complexity because imagine working with different leadership across different levels of the markets, from a market director all the way down to a seller, and coordinating that and making sure the operations there are solid. To get to that took a lot of learning. So to go back to the initial point, as an account strategist, and I remember the first few weeks where I started at Google, I was like, wow, if you one day you can get promoted in this company from at that point an account strategist to a senior account strategist, I was like, you got it. High five. You got promoted at Google. You can go back home to your city in East Germany and you can tell your family some stories of how you did it in the modern world, and you got promoted at such a company. And so that was week 2. And I was like, okay, let's lean into that. What Google did very early for me was they invested heavily in my self-development. So essentially in the first year, I was sitting in a course that used the DISC self-assessment. And what we did was try to understand what our strength, weaknesses, what can we grow into. And that to me was eye-opening because at that time I've never done something like this before. I was completely blind to my own strength and what I would bring to the table. I would be like, okay, you must have some, I don't want to pat myself on the shoulder here, but it's not what I mean, but you must have some charisma. Otherwise I would not have gotten to the final person.
So your eye on your disc is really high.
That's right. so, so for me, that was like, okay, you must do something, right? But I didn't know what. So that was the first key to self-awareness, and chatting in a group about that really built a foundation for me that I could build on. And it ultimately also helped me when I was diving into sales calls and my role and leaning on those strengths, but also honing in on my weaknesses and trying to figure out how can I improve those as well. I wasn't very analytical. I wasn't very detail driven. So those are pieces in my life that I really needed to learn. As I got promoted into my senior account strategist or account manager role, this is what it's called today. I was working with the largest agencies in Germany. I would fly back and forth in the country, developing those skills, honing in a little bit more. And at that time, I was 3 years in Google. I was like, okay, it's time for me to figure out. I feel comfortable. I've landed in that role. I have landed at the company. I love the company. The company obviously invested in me. Let's figure out how we can grow a little bit more. And this was still in the early days at Google. This was 2016, and Google was growing strongly in Asia. And I just came back from a vacation in Bali. And that vacation to me was so mesmerizing because it was my first time I was in Asia. And I remember standing at the airport in Singapore, and it said Bangkok, and it said Hong Kong, and it said Denpasar, and all those different cities and locations. And to me, I knew right then and there, I need to see this part of the world and experience this first on. And at Google, the beauty is nobody comes to you, and hopefully most corporate worlds, that's not the case, but nobody comes to you and is like, here, I got a new job for you. You go to Asia. It's more on me. So I have to figure out, how am I going to go to Asia with my company? And there was a job opening for Group M. So the Group M is one under the big WPP. Group M is an agency that was strongly positioned in Asia at that time. And they were looking for a Group M agency lead operating in Pakistan, service out of Singapore. So I was like, wow, this sounds wild. I was single at that time, so no family. I was like, this is an adventure. Let's go with that. So I went into the interviews, all went well in the beginning, and you have to also consider I'm very junior at that time still. And theoretically today, someone who has significant amount of management experience would get that job. But I went in as that newly promoted senior account manager, going for the deep end of the pool. And what do you expect happens in that last interview with my director of APAC? And I said, thank you, Willy, for trying for this interview, but you're too junior for this role. It's not going to happen. I was like, wow, but I really believe I can make a difference here. And I was confident in my skills at that point. And a week later, I get a ping from her that I didn't get the job, with a footnote that says, but we have an opening in Manila. And we're looking for an agency relationship manager in Manila. We have our entire agency sales program. Nobody has managed those agencies in 18 months. We strongly need support there. If you're willing to move to the Philippines, then we would consider you for the role. Long story short, that worked out, and I had the opportunity to move to Manila and actually become the head of agency there and build a program from scratch, which serves me well because I could put all my my spirit and my experience and my ideas into that new role. And so what I'm kind of describing here is a little bit of my leadership philosophy. So you heard me say strong investment into myself, self-awareness at the beginning, which is for me always the baseline of my standards and the standards that I operate with. And in Manila, I really had to learn how to structure myself. So I would need to understand my standard and how I operate and my self-awareness and how that was changing as I was living in the Philippines. But on top of that, I needed to figure out, how am I going to structure myself, my job, to be successful, and especially build a system that I can drive forward and at some point in time, hopefully hire more people and build a team. And I had to do that from the deep end of the pool, because obviously, how would I have done that before? At that point in time, not. And so I needed to figure out how to do it. Spend a lot of time investing again in myself, connecting with leadership, and build a structure to operate in highly effectively that was based on relationships and communication, because those two things I think extremely vital when it comes to business. Of course, Derek, but we can elaborate on that a little bit later. Then to speed that up a little bit, 2 years in the heat, 2 years in the high humidity, I was like, okay, cool, let's go and explore the opposite extremes, and found myself an opportunity in Canada. So I moved to Canada from 38 plus to 38 minus, all the way up in Toronto, and became the partner lead for our media and entertainment vertical. So I came from managing with the largest agencies for Google, and in Canada I was able to work with Walt Disney, Warner Brothers, Sony, Pictures, and PlayStation, and essentially bring them into our media sales cycle for YouTube at that time. Also there I met my wife. My daughter was born in Toronto, so I'm obviously a big Canadian, even though I'm German to some extent, but I have some loyalties. Go Raptors, for example. And after then 4 years successful in that role, my wife was from Ecuador and I'm from Germany, so we wanted to bring it a little bit closer as a triangle in the world. And an opportunity opened up in Portugal to be the vendor operations lead here. And I seized that because I thought that was the right move for our family. And for now, we're very, very happy over here.
Successful leaders always have intentionality. And so being intentional in our coaching, being intentional with our time, so we can be most effective. And so I guess talk to me a little bit about just intentionality, consistency. What are your insights on that?
Yeah, I learned very early that, and this comes back from my school in Germany, that a C plus will also pass. I don't need to get an A. And so how do I translate that to the business world? That, of course, I want to deliver the best possible results, don't get me wrong. But I need to be smart with my time. And time is my biggest investment that I have as a human being, to figure out where I'm going to guide that and how I'm going to maximize my time and maximize the impact of my time. So with that intentionality and that knowledge behind it, I always needed to figure out, or I needed to figure out very early, how can I create consistency through systems that drive sales performance. For example, in the Philippines, as the head of agencies, I needed to create that system. That system was at the baseline, high self-awareness, understanding the people that I'm working with, understanding that they're not just business operators, but they're also people that have family, that have kids. That was always the baseline. Standards to me means who we are. Then I had to put in the structure for that. The structure for that was highly based on communication. So the first bits, it sounds very simple, but I had to figure out who are the C-levels at those agencies. If I couldn't find them in our CRM, I would find them on LinkedIn, and I would just schedule a connect with them. And the connect with them was not to sell anything, it was just to spend time, talk, build a relationship, fundamental things. Hopefully I'm not saying anything new to anyone. But you can continue that relationship building and communicational piece, because the second layer of that is, how do you then have frequent touch points with those people, individuals? You can do that through newsletter, update them, bring them in on board. Transparency plays a huge role, and essentially creating a rhythm of communication that then serves as a structure. The second bit is, you have certain layers in that structure, at least for me, that you can always go back to. And that structure changes compared to the job that you are doing. So now, as a vendor operations lead, if I think about the structure, I have certain checkpoints that I have next to the rhythm that I'm operating. So I have a communication rhythm, and then I have certain checkpoints to make sure that our operations run smoothly. For example, I have to make sure that the onboarding process for new sellers are optimized and are running well. I gotta have to make sure that we are fully staffed when we run a sales operation. I have to make sure the culture is sound and solid on the ground and on the sales floor. I have to make sure that we have the right trainings and so on. You get the gist of it. But you can go quickly into those individual items and assess if we're doing well within that part of the structure or not, and then address them as a symptom or as the cause, TBD, whatever it is. But it's very important to put that in place. And then the last bit of this entire system, and I call that the standard of consistency, essentially, is this idea of consistent sharpening the brain, sharpening the organization. How do you do that? Most will immediately go to self-development and be like, okay, I need to do this course, I need to read this book. And yes, you should develop yourself, but I think you should also build a good culture that runs on feedback. And that is another bit I had to learn over my career. And it started early at Google, but it was really solidified in the Philippines and the following roles after that. Because there's different ways to give feedback, obviously. And I needed to figure out for myself, okay, how do I build a system around giving feedback so it's not always personal when it's constructive? So SPI stands for situation, behavior, impact, and it takes the personality out of the situation. So I can talk about situational feedback where I say, hey, really in this situation, you could have led that sales call into that direction, which led to the situation that you seemed overconfident in that moment because you think you got it, but in the end you actually did not get the sale because the customer didn't understand what you were talking about. Next time, what we can do differently is X, Y, and Z. But it goes into that always makes it situational and doesn't necessarily talk about like, hey, really, you really suck as a seller. It has nothing to do with that. But in that situation, I noticed you had a certain weakness that you could have addressed. That's what I needed to learn. Because as you scale your operations, as you scale your touch points with individuals, obviously you need to move your organization along. And how do you do that? You do that through consistent shuffling, through feedback, through shadowing, and to making sure that you have a cycle where you create that loop that consistently feeds this feedback back into the standards and the structure and essentially the sharpening. So that's a long answer for what your question was on intentionality and so on. But for me, it was always about how do you create consistency. And for me, the short answer is through systems. And this is what I, wanted to shed a little bit of light on.
When you talk about feedback and it being as vital as it was, like this is a little bit more of a personal question. What's some challenging or hard feedback you had to hear, but then also apply to take that next step in your leadership?
Yeah, that's fair. Feedback that I've heard and had to work on a lot is the attention to detail. I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but as a leader, you need to have a certain sense of detail. I don't want to be over detailed, to be honest, but if you don't have an eye for some of the fine print, you may find yourself in some really rough situations. And give you an example. I've in my initial role in the Philippines, I missed a particular year-on-year data point when I did an analysis for a kickback on an agency deal, and it led to the agency deal not firing. So imagine that you as an agency spend X amount of millions of dollars, and in the end, you don't get the money as part of the contract. That leads to painful relationships, painful conversations, and can lead to the loss of money. We addressed that, we fixed that, all good in the end. But for me, I saw it over and over happening again. Whereas in the role in Canada, I didn't pay attention to the detail of the change of an advertising product. And I did not communicate that to our partner at that time, who was essentially furious to hear that Google is changing the product and they're not bringing them along on that journey, and that they're reading this and hearing this from the agency, but not from the Google representative. And again, it was a slap on my wrist. And I was like, okay, you thought you got it. You didn't communicate this proactively. You didn't put attention to detail right there. Why is that? So it could be a quest of everybody else is wrong, or I think I have to search for the answer inside of myself. And essentially, I was not very clear about my own standards on how I want to work. And so I had to go back and figure out, okay, back to my baseline, right? Who we are, who am I, what is my standard? Okay, I see I have some shortcomings there. Let's be really intentional about proactively communicating. And the worst that can happen to you is you communicate it twice. But communicating it twice is probably better than not communicating it at all. And so I gradually worked on my attention to detail, and that feedback has now, thankfully, gotten less and less as I work at Google. As an example,
If I say the word feedback, for leaders listening, if when you hear that, your immediate response and needle points to the negative, I think there's a perspective shift that we've got to really assess in ourselves. Like, um, really seeing feedback as neutral at worst, positive would be the ideal. Even if it's harsh feedback, it's still positive, but kind of taking a more neutral and or positive approach with feedback, I found is helpful for people, because when we go into conversations too, to where we know we're about to get feedback, we're about to hear feedback, man, we lock up, we start to get defensive. We really lose opportunities to take those pieces of information that are going to make us better, as hard as they might be to hear in the moment. And so you've experienced burnout before, and I know that in a lot of people who are driven can get to that spot where they get overdriven, or they push too hard, or they push too fast, or there's a lot of factors that go into burnout. And so for you, what did burnout teach you about ambition, boundaries, and showing up differently?
I would always say it's a big word, and everybody experiences, I think, a little bit differently. So I think it's, first of all, to be fair, that there are different levels of this. For me, I think it was the most acute level where I couldn't get out of bed. I was still working, but I would be extremely grumpy at home. And I think it has to do with a little bit of change of life at that time. If you think about new father, COVID in Canada, lockdown, nobody can leave the house. You got to work a high-paced job that has you still at the computer Friday 8 9 p.m. when you just want to lean back and be done. You are still filing tickets because certain movies on or certain trailers on YouTube have like blood splatter, and so you need to challenge that back and forth with the team. Otherwise, your media would move to your competitors, and your revenue as a partner league would be at risk. So you would go all in on that, and you would go on that consistently because that was my standard. It's like I will do the best for my partners, and that comes at the cost of other things. So when you can't leave the house, when you are that new parent, and when you are giving everything at work, at some point in time, your glass is full to here and may start to overflow. And it shows differently for people. For me, it showed more in this grumpy about certain things, moody, and with the help also of my wife at that point in time, who gave me feedback on that. So to go back, which I think is really important as a couple to talk about these things. I also understood that I needed to make a change. This was at this point 3 years into that role, and I needed to go into a different direction. And sometimes it's tough to, as you are so zoned in to that particular moment and you feel so exhausted and you feel so grumpy, it's tough to take the macro view of things, zoom out, and reassess. I luckily got there by accident, as I was at the end of the year. My wife's from Ecuador. I'm throwing my wife in here a lot, so if you listen to this, hello. But she's from Ecuador, so luckily what that meant is that towards November at that time we were able to go down with masks with baby to Quito, and we spent 3 months in Ecuador. And it was just very different because all of a sudden I was sitting outside, I was seeing the sun, I was seeing the blue skies, I was seeing a different environment. I wasn't freezing cold in my Canadian house. So I realized I would like to have a different life for us rather than just go and raise a family in that environment and feel secluded 6 months out of the year. And so I applied initially I said, okay, the solution is to leave Google, because I must not be happy at Google, and Google is giving me the burnout. So I applied for this, by the way. If this would have gone through, it would have been the worst outcome in that situation, because I applied to be the head of business development for a crypto exchange in Toronto.
Yeah, you avoided one there.
So I think I would have dug myself a deeper hole. So again, that's what I mean. It's like at that point in time, I wasn't fully. I knew I wanted to have change. I didn't see that the environment that I needed to operate from was the change, not necessarily the company. And so luckily they said, yep, you made it. We're going to hire you. And then they ghosted me, and then they did not hire me. And that was luckily a red flag that we moved beyond. And the same day I got that email, as I was initially distraught. And then there was a job opening in Portugal. And to me, that was my lucky calling, because that was the one that, as I was in Ecuador, I applied for the job. I had all my job interviews from Ecuador at that time. I got the yes, we want to hire you. And that was the bit that essentially lifted me out, put me in a different place of the world. And ever since then, I'm not operating at this 100% mental capacity anymore. And as I've spent a lot of time with the self-awareness, refining the system that we've talked about earlier, I've been able to concentrate certain bits of my energy there, but not at the ever reducing or taking my battery complete to zero. And that has literally changed the relationship for me. But I do understand that for other people, it may look very different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very subjective experience when it comes to burnout. And but I think a couple things that listeners can take away is like a checklist. Like sometimes burnout is internal boundaries that we might have that we don't have in place. Like we're consistently working past, time, and it's cutting into family time, and there's no one really putting that pressure on us. We're just kind of putting that pressure on ourselves. And so it's more of an internal shift. If that's what the issue is, you can pick up and go to another company, but you're taking those bad habits with you, and it's going to surface again.
I don't want to interrupt you, but if I also may say, you may not have the right structure in place for how you operate. you may not have the right feedback loops in place, or you may need to dive in a little bit more into your own standards. Like, this is what I mean from that system. You can micro dissect certain environments, but you can also macro dissect certain environments and put yourself into that system and try to figure out, okay, is it my standards where I'm off? Am I working too hard? Do I believe in hustle culture and all I'm going to do now is hustle, hustle, hustle? To what extent? Question mark. Or is it I'm structuring my day wrong? I am taking lunch breaks that are 2 hours long and then I can't catch up on the back end. Really simple examples. May again be very different, but just something to think about as well.
So I want to get to fatherhood. How has fatherhood changed your perspective, maybe on life, as it does for all of us who are parents? But then also, just how has that, I guess, shaped your leadership?
Initially, becoming a father was tough, I have to say. Tough because I think the bonding takes a little bit longer. Not that, look, I had a very beautiful, birth was also a little bit tricky, but we did the thing, like skin to skin in the beginning, spending a lot of time. But it took like 6 months until my little daughter gave me a little smile. And that was the warmest smile I think I've ever gotten in my life. But until then, I know explicitly that's like, this is tough. You don't have any sleep. You have to work. Something is crying. And I barely know how to stop it at that moment in time. And I'm not getting any rewards and I'm not getting any of this. But it's not about me. And I think leadership lesson number one is not about me. It's about my little girl and making sure that she gets on the right track. So it's like, if you're a leader, it's about your team, it's about your colleagues, not about myself. As we then progressed, I had to learn how to become empathetic, more empathetic. And the bit that I didn't get much when I grew up was empathy. Not because my parents didn't know how to show it, but I grew up in East Germany. They knew that there are certain expectations. You have to be at the dinner table at 6. They're pretty clear standards and a pretty heavy structure that they were operating by, but not a whole lot of empathy, a whole lot of love. But that bit I needed to learn. Till this day, it's very tough for me to cry at random moments, for example. So my daughter made me cry. My daughter showed me how to be empathetic. It's not about myself, but I have to listen to her needs, and I have to approach her empathetically when certain things are not going right. I have to have a little bit more patience. I didn't used to have a lot of patience. I think leadership is also about showing patience with, if you give certain projects to people, whatever you do, don't expect the outcome from one day to another. And I think this is the same thing that fatherhood has taught me. So essentially, there are so many lessons there that I can translate back to what I do today. And then, of course, the big piece on, can I create a psychologically safe environment for my daughter where she can say whatever she wants, where she can act however she wants. And I want that for her more than anything else. And luckily she has that. But to some extent, that is also true for teams. Maybe not in that depth of a father-daughter relationship. I don't think that's necessary. But that same space where we can say how we feel and be open with each other. So those things are all connected for me. It was not the easiest journey in the beginning. Move forward 6 months, we started to bond. Today, she's 5.5 now. She's my best friend. Wouldn't imagine a day without her. If I'm on a business trip for 3 days, I'm distraught. It's not that easy. But she continues to teach me lessons. She continues to teach me patience, and she helps me reflect a lot on myself, who I am, but also how I show up. And these elements I'll take right back into my roles in the professional world, because I also think those two things are connected. They're not necessarily different for me.
I want to summarize back just so we catch those. I think there's a lot of I think there's some themes that I know resonate. So it's not about me. I think it's a big one, like you said, which is a selfless posture and also a very intentional choice. Like that is a daily mindset shift whenever we're in certain seasons of trying to lead a team of people, even if it's just a few people, let alone a lot of people, to not make it about what we want, to truly have a selfless posture as a leader is a choice. The other one was empathy. growing in empathy, patience, and then providing a safe environment. I guess what are the ingredients to providing a safe environment for a team?
For me, it stems from a psychologically safe space. That's the baseline right there. A great environment overall for a team is where you have like different people that are very different from you contribute to different parts of the business for the greater good. That also means that there is natural amount of friction there, because once you start becoming once you are a team of different individuals, you're likely to clash at some point in time, one or another, or you may. But by clash, I mean, we're going to challenge each other.
Healthy
So
conflict.
exactly? How do you overcome that? So these are the baselines, but in meetings, what we try to do is encourage a behavior of, we have a meeting with our managing director, or we have a meeting with our VP, and we have a Q&A. It's okay to go first. It's okay to step in and ask a question. It's okay to get involved. Here's a lesson that with my daughter, right? Respond over react. Have a conversation. Don't jump in mid-sentence. Often it's okay to also just listen to one another. Thank them. Thank each other. Those are like super basics, but I think they go out of the window quite a bit, especially in high stakes situations. I think the idea of it's okay not to know as a team, the expectation of it's okay if you don't know the answer. We're going to figure it out together, right? And essentially communicating with each other consistently. I've seen those ingredients over my career at Google. This goes on certain things. I just don't want to go too deep into all of those elements, but those are the bits and pieces that stand out to me that I see great teams do over and over again. That they have frequent outlets of conversation. They have a culture where no one is afraid to go first. They have a culture of responding versus like, oh no, we're not going to do this, and rather having a conversation around this, and where it's okay not to know. And I think that bit to me is extremely powerful, to admit it's okay, I don't know the answer to this, versus having an answer for everything, because I don't think that's possible. Maybe with AI we can dive in there, but I don't know everything either.
So having a culture of safety, as you see it, and just to highlight some of the themes there, it's providing a culture too to where people are encouraged to, like you said, jump in and be the first one to respond or answer something. And a lot of times from a leadership standpoint, and I think this is back to intentionality, as a leader, being very mindful, what is my response when I agree with somebody? What is my response when I disagree with somebody? What is my response when I don't know about something? All of those things are being, you're as a leader of a team, people are getting their cues and they're watching you. You're someone that they respect. You're higher up in the organization. Hopefully, you're someone that they respect. You're higher up in the organization, and and sometimes I think we miss out on really key leadership moments because we lack intentionality. Because like if I'm going into a meeting and I remind myself, okay, if I hear something that I just completely disagree with, I need to be very calculated in what my initial response is. And even if, because what I don't want to do, I don't want to discredit or get the other people who are silently watching to be one scared to say something that they truly feel and believe because of a certain kind of response I'm going to have. But I also want to model humility, and I want to model that everybody's input here is going to help us ultimately get to where we want to go more effectively. And so I think just being very intentional with our initial responses and can be another key way to create a safe environment if you truly do if you want to bring everybody into the conversation, even if there's differing opinions.
And I would add on, intentionality comes out of the self-awareness bit. So if you are self-aware enough to find yourself in those moments, be like, oh crap, I like immediately reacted, didn't listen to anybody, slap yourself on the wrist and direct your course into a different direction. I think that then you can be intentional about this. Fortunately, I've also seen a lot of leaders that lack self-awareness. And then it becomes a very tricky situation. So that's what I mean by this is the standard that we set, right? This is the bar, this is the foundation that we then can build on. And if you think about high performing teams that don't necessarily burn out, for me, this is always the baseline. What we just talked about. The rest we can layer on, but you need that first element. And if you don't have it, you can achieve high performance, but this is going to be sustainable and consistent.
Very well said. Tell us a little bit about if any kind of projects or anything that you want to promote just in the work that you're doing or what you're up to.
Outside of work, I spend a lot of time writing this down, to be honest. So this helps me self-reflect and course correct a little bit more. So over the past months, I've built a personal website, which is a new bit for me, which the readers can find on, it's my first what's my first bit of my name, my last bit of the name. So Willy Kuhne, vq.studio. This is where I reflect on my leadership, my journey, and everything that we've talked about today. I noted down there. And then my leadership system I wrote down in a book, which I call The Standard of Consistency, that readers can either get on Kindle or they can get it for free on Gumroad. But then they have to read it in a PDF and not on the Kindle reader. That's the whole reason why that's available on both platforms. I find that writing helps me be very grounded on my thoughts, sometimes better than I can probably speak them. And so I try to connect both of those elements together and continue building the system and refining the system, because I also know that leadership always changes.
And I will, for the listeners, I'll link all that in the show notes. And I really appreciate your time and just, talking through some of these leadership lessons. There's some practical things in there I would encourage the leaders to consider, and then obviously checking out more of your work at the links you just said.
Thank you very much, Derek.